The gavel struck the mahogany sound block with a finality that echoed in the hollows of my chest, shattering whatever hope I had left. It wasn't a loud sound, but to my ears, it sounded like a gunshot. I sat frozen in the hard wooden chair, my hands clasping a purse that was already fraying at the seams, staring blankly at the polished seal of the court hanging above the judge's head. Order. That was what the judge called for, but there was no order in my world anymore. Chaos had swallowed it whole. I turned my head slowly, fighting the stiffness in my neck, to look at him. Julian. My son. My beautiful boy with the same sandy hair as his late father, and the blue eyes that used to look at me with such adoration when he scraped his knee or needed help with his homework. Now, those eyes were glacial, devoid of any warmth. He stood there in his charcoal Italian suit, adjusting his silk tie, a faint, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. It was a calculated expression, one of a predator who had just successfully taken down its prey. Beside him stood Serena, his wife. Her posture was rigid, her arms crossed over her chest, her fingers tapping rhythmically against her designer dress. She didn't look at me. She looked at the judge, at the papers, at the victory. She had won. They had won. In a matter of 45 minutes, Eleanor Vance, 65 years old, a widow, a retired librarian who had spent her life curating stories for others, had been erased. The house on Maple Street, the one with the oak tree Julian used to climb, the savings accounts I had built dollar by dollar over 40 years, the emergency fund for my medical care, it was all gone. Transferred, signed over, stolen legally. The judge, a man with tired eyes who clearly wanted to go home to his dinner, signed the final decree without so much as a glance in my direction. He declared that due to my alleged declining mental faculties, a lie fabricated by a doctor Julian had paid handsomely, my son was now my legal guardian and the executor of my estate. And since the house was too much of a burden for me, the eviction notice was immediate. I don't remember walking out of the courthouse. I remember the sensation of the heavy oak doors closing behind me, pushing me out into the biting wind of a Seattle autumn evening. The rain was beginning to fall, a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked through my thin coat instantly. I stood on the sidewalk, the city bustling around me, cars honking, people rushing to warmth, to safety, to family. I had nowhere to go. Julian had promised the court he would place me in a suitable facility, but as I stood there shivering, his sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down just an inch. "You brought this on yourself, Mother," he said. His voice was low, smooth, terrifyingly calm. "You were wasting that money. You were hoarding that house. Serena and I, we have a future. You're just the past." The window rolled up. The car merged into traffic, its red taillights blurring into the wet asphalt, disappearing into the gray city. That was the moment I ceased to be Eleanor Vance, mother and grandmother-to-be. I became a ghost. 6 weeks. It had been 6 weeks since that day. I was huddled in the corner of an alleyway behind a bakery, the smell of yeast and rotting garbage mingling in the stagnant air. My hands, once capable of restoring the bindings of antique books, were now blackened with grime, shaking uncontrollably as I sorted through a dumpster. Aluminum cans, that was my currency now. If I found enough, I could buy a coffee to warm my hands, maybe a bagel if the shop owner was feeling generous. Hunger is a strange thing. At first, it is a sharp, screaming pain in your stomach. Then, after a few days, it becomes a dull, heavy ache that spreads to your bones. It makes you lightheaded. It makes the world seem distant, like you are watching it through a thick pane of foggy glass. But the shame never dulls. It burns brighter with every passing day. People walked by the mouth of the alley. I saw their shoes polished leather, clean sneakers, high heels. They never looked at me. To them, I was part of the urban landscape, a pile of rags, an inconvenience. If they did look, it was with a mixture of pity and revulsion that felt like a physical slap. I adjusted the plastic bag on my shoulder. It was torn, tied together with a piece of string I found in a gutter. Inside, 20 cans rattled. My treasure. I made my way to the recycling center, my feet dragging. My shoes, sturdy loafers I had bought 5 years ago, had given up the ghost weeks ago. The sole of the right one flapped with every step, a rhythmic reminder of my defeat. I kept my head down, avoiding reflections in store windows. I didn't want to see the woman staring back. I didn't want to see the matted gray hair, the hollow cheeks, the eyes that had lost their light. The man at the recycling center was named Gus. He was a large man with grease-stained hands. He took my bag without a word, weighed it, and handed me $3.50. He didn't smile. He didn't say thank you. I was just a transaction. I took the coins, feeling their cold metal against my palm. $3.50. Enough for a loaf of bread and maybe a small bottle of water. I walked to the nearest convenience store. The cashier, a young girl with bright pink headphones around her neck, watched me like I was going to steal something. I placed the bread and water on the counter, counting out the change carefully. My fingers trembled, dropping a dime. I scrambled to pick it up, panic rising in my throat. Every cent mattered. I left the store quickly, clutching the bread to my chest like it was a newborn child. I returned to the park, to the bench that had become my bed. It was located under a large elm tree that offered some shelter from the rain, though not much from the cold. I sat down and broke off a piece of bread. I ate slowly, savoring the texture, the taste of yeast and salt. It was the best meal I had ever had. As I chewed, I watched the world go by. Mothers pushing strollers, couples holding hands, an old man throwing a ball for his dog. They all had lives. They all had destinations. I closed my eyes, letting the memories wash over me, memories I usually tried to suppress because they hurt too much. I remembered waking up in my own bed, the smell of brewing coffee, the sunlight filtering through the lace curtains I had sewn myself. I remembered the safety. How did the boy I nursed, through fevers, the boy I took a second job for, so he could have a computer for college, turn into the monster who left me here? It was a question that had no answer. A loop that played in my mind until I was dizzy with grief. "Excuse me?" The voice was deep, resonant, and startled me so much I nearly dropped my bread. I snapped my eyes open. Standing before me was a man in an immaculate navy blue suit. He held a leather briefcase and an umbrella that shielded him from the drizzle. He looked out of place, like a diamond in a coal mine. I shrank back against the bench, pulling my coat tighter. "I don't have any money," I rasped. My voice sounded foreign, unused. "I'm not here for your money, madam," the man said. He didn't look at me with disgust. He looked at me with recognition, intensity. "Are you Eleanor Vance?" My heart hammered against my ribs. No one had used my name in weeks. Hearing it felt dangerous. I hesitated, then nodded slowly. He let out a breath, a small cloud of steam, escaping his lips. "Thank God. I have been looking for you for nearly a month. My name is Silas Thorne. I am an attorney." Fear spiked in my chest. "Attorney." Julian sent him. "He wants to make sure I'm dead. He wants to finish the job. Please, just leave me alone," I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. "He took everything. There is nothing left to take." "Mrs. Vance, please listen," Silas said, crouching down so he was at eye level with me, disregarding the wet pavement ruining his expensive trousers. "I am not associated with your son. I represent the estate of Arthur Sterling." The name hit me harder than the cold wind. "Arthur? Arthur?" I breathed. "My brother?" We hadn't spoken in 20 years. A stupid argument over our parents' funeral arrangements, fueled by grief and pride, had created a chasm we never crossed. He had moved to San Francisco, made a fortune in technology, and I had stayed here. I thought he had forgotten me. "Your brother passed away 3 months ago," Silas said gently. The world tilted. Arthur was dead. My big brother, the one who taught me to ride a bike, the one who used to protect me from neighborhood bullies, was gone, and I didn't even know. I let out a sob, a raw, ugly sound that tore through my throat. "I am so sorry," Silas continued, offering me a clean handkerchief. "But he left a will, and he left you everything." I stared at him, unable to comprehend the words. "Everything?" "Yes, his entire estate, including his primary residence here in Washington, a portfolio of investments, and liquid assets totaling approximately $40 million. $40 million. The number was abstract, meaningless. It was too big to fit into my reality of $3.50. "But," Silas said, and his expression grew serious, "there is a condition. a very specific stipulation that must be met before the inheritance is fully released to your control. I looked at the handkerchief in my hand, white and crisp against my dirty skin. What condition? You must reside in his mansion, Blackwood Manor, for exactly 90 days. During that time, you cannot leave the premises for more than a few hours a day, and you must complete a specific task he prepared for you. What task? Silas stood up and extended a hand to help me. Come with me, Mrs. Vance. It is better if I show you. The car is waiting. I looked at his hand. Then I looked at my bag of cans, sitting by the bench. I looked at the dark park, the wet grass, the misery of my existence. I took his hand. The drive was silent. I sat in the back of the heated limousine, wrapped in a wool blanket Silas had provided. I watched the city recede, the gray concrete giving way to lush green forests as we drove north. We entered a private gated community, winding up a long driveway lined with ancient pines. Blackwood Manor was not just a house, it was a fortress of stone and glass overlooking the Puget Sound. It was breathtaking, imposing, and cold. Silas led me inside. The foyer was cavernous, with marble floors that reflected the crystal chandelier above. It was warm. It smelled of lemon polish and old books. Staff has been retained, Silas explained. A cook, a housekeeper, a groundskeeper. They are at your disposal. Your wardrobe has been stocked with clothes in your size. There is hot food waiting in the dining room. I felt like an imposter. I wanted to ask him if this was a cruel joke. The condition, Mrs. Vance, Silas said, leading me not to the dining room, but to a heavy oak door on the ground floor. This was your brother's study. He opened the door. The room was lined with bookshelves from floor to ceiling. In the center sat a large mahogany desk, and on it, a single, sealed envelope and a silver key. On the wall behind the desk was a large, modern wall safe. Arthur knew about your situation, Silas said softly. I turned to him, shocked. How? We haven't spoken in decades. He had eyes everywhere. He hired private investigators about a year ago when he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. He wanted to reconnect, but when his investigators reported back what your son was doing, what he was planning, Arthur changed his strategy. He knew he couldn't stop it legally in time, and he knew you. He knew you would forgive your son. He knew you would hand over your own safety to protect Julian. Silas's words stung because they were true. I had always been soft. I had always made excuses for Julian. So, he prepared this. Silas gestured to the room. The condition is this. You must spend the next 90 days reviewing the contents of that safe. You must watch every video, read every document, listen to every recording. You must confront the full truth of what was done to you, and at the end of the 90 days, you must make a decision. What decision? I asked, my voice trembling. To seek justice or to walk away. If you leave before the 90 days, or if you refuse to review the evidence, the money goes to charity. You get nothing. I looked at the safe. It loomed over me like a monolith. I will leave you to settle in, Silas said. Rest tonight. Eat. Bathe. The 90 days begin tomorrow. That night, I showered for an hour. I scrubbed my skin until it was raw, watching the gray water swirl down the drain, carrying away the grime of the streets. I ate a meal of roast chicken and vegetables, crying with every bite because it tasted like life. I slept in a bed that felt like a cloud, but my dreams were haunted by Julian's cold smile. The next morning, I entered the study. I inserted the key into the safe. It clicked open. Inside, there were no piles of cash or gold bars. There were rows of hard drives, folders, and a tablet. I sat at the desk and opened the first folder. It was dated 8 months ago. It contained transcripts of emails between Julian and a lawyer named Henderson, a man known for shady dealings. Subject: the old woman. Body: she's holding onto the house like a tick. We need to accelerate the competency hearing. I found a doctor who will testify for $5,000. Can we draft the power of attorney papers now? Make sure the language is dense. She won't understand it. She trusts me. I felt a bile rise in my throat. She trusts me. I put the paper down and picked up the tablet. There was a video file labeled Consultation. I pressed play. The video was grainy, likely recorded from a hidden camera in a lawyer's office. Julian was there, sitting with Serena. They were laughing. "She's totally clueless," Julian said on the screen, sipping a scotch. I told her it was for her own protection. She looked at me with those big, watery eyes and thanked me. "Can you believe it?" She thanked me for stealing her life. Serena chimed in, fixing her hair. "Just make sure we get the accounts cleared before we dump her. I don't want to be stuck paying for a nursing home. Just drop her at a shelter or something. She's resilient. She'll figure it out. Or not. Who cares?" I paused the video. I ran to the bathroom attached to the study and vomited. Day after day, I went through the archives. It was a torture chamber of my own making. I saw financial records showing Julian using my life savings to pay off gambling debts. I saw Serena buying a Porsche with the money I had set aside for my funeral. I heard audio recordings of them mocking my cooking, my clothes, my love for them. "She's a leech," Julian said in one recording. "A useless eater. I can't wait until she's gone so we can sell that dump on Maple Street and buy the condo in Miami." Every day, a piece of the old Eleanor died. The Eleanor who made excuses. The Eleanor who thought love was enough to fix everything. But as that Eleanor died, something else began to take her place. Something harder. Something like steel forged in fire. I wasn't just sad anymore. I was angry. A deep, cold rage began to settle in my marrow. Arthur had given me a gift. He hadn't just given me money. He had given me the truth. He had forced me to look at the monster I had raised without the filter of a mother's love. By day 60, I had finished reviewing the evidence. I spent the remaining month preparing. I worked with Silas. I hired a forensic accountant. I hired a new legal team. The sharks that Arthur used to employ. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to hunt. On the 90th day, the restriction was lifted. I was officially the owner of the Sterling estate. I had $50 million, a mansion, and a mountain of evidence. Silas asked me, "What do you want to do, Mrs. Vance? Do we file criminal charges? We have enough for fraud, elder abuse, embezzlement. We can put them in prison for 15 years. I looked out the window at the gray ocean churning below. I thought about prison. I thought about Julian in a cell. It would be justice, yes, but it wouldn't be enough. Prison was too easy. He would play the victim. He would blame the system. He would never truly understand." "No," I said, turning to Silas. "I want a meeting. Bring them here." It took 3 days to arrange. Silas sent an invitation to Julian and Serena, claiming that the executor of Arthur Sterling's estate wished to discuss a potential claim they might have as relatives. Greed, I knew, was their weakness. They wouldn't be able to resist the scent of more money. They arrived at Blackwood Manor in the Porsche they bought with my money. I watched from the upstairs window as they stepped out, looking around at the grandeur of the estate with hungry eyes. Silas led them into the main dining room. I had set the scene carefully. The long mahogany table was empty, except for a single folder at my end. I sat in a high-backed chair, facing the door. When they walked in, they stopped dead. "Mom?" Julian gasped. His face went pale, then red. What are you doing here?" We thought you were dead. Or in a shelter," Serena added, her eyes darting around the room. "Are you the housekeeper?" I didn't smile. I didn't stand up. "Sit down," I commanded. My voice wasn't the wavering whisper of the homeless woman in the park. It was the voice of the matriarch of Blackwood Manor. They sat, confused and wary. "This is my house," I said simply. "Arthur left it to me, along with $50 million. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched the gears turn in their heads. Shock, disbelief, and then, terrifyingly, calculation. I saw Julian's posture shift. He leaned forward, putting on that familiar, charming smile. "Mom, that's incredible. Oh my God, we've been so worried about you. We looked everywhere. The police said you ran away." "Liar," I said. The word hung in the air like a blade. Julian blinked. "What? Mom, you're confused. We tried to find you. We wanted to bring you home." I opened the folder on the table. I slid a photograph across the mahogany surface. It was a still from the video of them laughing in the lawyer's office. Then, I slid a transcript of the email. "She's a useless eater." Then a bank statement highlighting the Porsche purchase. Julian's face turned the color of ash. Serena went rigid. I know everything, Julian. I know about the gambling debts. I know about the doctor you bribed. I know you toasted to my death while drinking my husband's vintage scotch. Julian began to stammer. Mom, please, that's taken out of context. We were under stress. We loved you. We just needed— Stop, I cut him off. I don't want to hear your voice lying to me ever again. Silas stepped forward from the shadows of the corner. The evidence Mrs. Vance has collected is sufficient to indict both of you on 12 counts of fraud, 4 counts of elder abuse, and conspiracy. The district attorney has already reviewed the preliminary file. He is waiting for Mrs. Vance's call to issue the arrest warrants. Serena started to cry. It was a fake, ugly sound. Eleanor, please, we're family, we made a mistake. Don't send us to jail. I looked at them, really looked at them. They were small, they were pathetic. They weren't monsters. They were just weak, greedy children who had never been told no. I have a choice to make, I said, standing up. I can make that call. You will go to prison. You will lose everything. The Porsche, the condo, your freedom. You will be branded as felons who abused their own mother. Julian dropped to his knees. Mom, please. I'm your son. Don't destroy me. I walked around the table until I stood in front of him. I looked down at the son I had birthed, the son I had worshipped. I'm not going to send you to prison, Julian. He let out a sob of relief, reaching for my hand. Thank you. Thank you. I knew you loved. I pulled my hand away. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me. Because if I send you to prison, I carry that weight. I become the mother who caged her child. And I refuse to let you take one more piece of my soul, I signaled to Silas. He placed a document in front of them. This is a confession, I explained, and a surrender of assets. You will sign over every penny you have to me to repay what you stole. You will sell the condo, the car, the clothes. You will be left with nothing, just as you left me. And then? Julian whispered. And then you will leave. You will move to a different state. You will get jobs. You will work. And you will never, ever contact me again. If you come within 10 miles of me, if you send a letter, if you try to sue, the deal is void and the police come for you. They signed. Their hands shook, tears fell onto the crisp paper, but they signed. When they were done, Julian looked up at me. His eyes were red, hollow. Mom, do you still love me? The question broke my heart, but I knew the answer. I love the memory of the boy you were, Julian, but I do not know the man you are, and I do not want to know him. Get out. They left. I watched them walk down the long driveway, stripped of their arrogance, stripped of their stolen wealth. They looked small against the towering pines. I stood in the doorway, the cold wind hitting my face. But this time, I wasn't shivering. I was warm. 6 months later, the ribbon cutting was a simple affair. No flashy press, no champagne fountains, just a group of women standing in front of the renovated Victorian house in downtown Seattle. The sign above the door read, "The Arthur Sterling Foundation for Women." I stood at the podium, looking at the crowd. There was Mary, who had been evicted by her nephew. There was Susan, whose husband had hidden all their assets before divorcing her. There was the woman I had met in the alley 6 months ago, who was now our head cook. We offered legal aid, financial literacy courses, and temporary housing. We offered dignity. Silas stood in the back, smiling. He approached me after the ceremony. Arthur would be proud, Eleanor. I smiled, touching the silver locket around my neck. Inside was a picture of Arthur and me as children. I found one last letter in the safe yesterday, I told Silas. It was hidden in the back. What did it say? I pulled the folded paper from my pocket. It was short. Eleanor, if you are reading this, you chose justice over revenge. You chose to build rather than destroy. I knew you would. You were always the best of us. P.S. I didn't leave you the money so you could be rich. I left you the money so you could be powerful. There is a difference. Use your power. Love, Arthur. I looked at the house, filled with light and noise and the smell of baking bread. I looked at the women who were finding their footing again, just as I had. I took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. It no longer smelled of rain and garbage. It smelled of pine, of ocean salt, and of the future. My son had tried to erase me. He had tried to turn me into a ghost, but he had failed. I wasn't a ghost. I was a fortress, and my doors were open.